In 10,000 BC, woolly mammoths and mastodons roamed the woodlands of present-day southwestern Ontario, alongside the province's earliest known human residents. Ontario's main First Nations groups were the Algonquin, who were migrant hunters, and the Iroquois, who farmed squash, corn, and beans. While French explorer Etienne Brulé became the first European to travel through southwestern Ontario, Henry Hudson claimed the Hudson Bay area, hundreds of miles to the north, for Great Britain in 1611. Iroquois warriors destroyed North America's first inland French settlement, St. Mary among the Huron, in 1649, in a conflict with the Huron, who enjoyed a friendly trading relationship with the French. The Iroquois staged several revolts against both the French and other First Nation groups during the next few decades. In 1668, Sault Ste. Marie became the first permanent European community in both present-day Ontario and the American state of Michigan. In Canada, the fur trade first began during the 1600s and continued for more than 250 years. The fur trade was primarily sustained through the trapping of beavers to satisfy the European demand for felt hats. This competitive trade opened Canada to both exploration and settlement. The fur trade also financed missionary work and established economic and colonial relationships between the European settlers and the Native American tribes. The 17th century witnessed a dramatic growth in European demand for furs. Driving this demand was the latest fashion craze to storm Europe. Fur and fur-trimmed clothing were sought after as expressions of both status and wealth. However, one item in particular emerged as the must-have staple of men's fashion: the broad-brimmed felt hat made from beaver fur. Unfortunately, the surging demand for beaver pelts led to the overhunting and near extinction of the European beaver. This prompted the European market to look elsewhere for these furs. At first, Europe set their sights on Russia to meet their demands. However, the cheaper and more plentiful alternative quickly became the North American beaver. The fur trade began as a secondary industry in North America, second only to the fishing industry, and it was the demand for beaver pelts that propelled fur trade to the forefront during the 17th century. At first, the French held a monopoly over the Canadian fur trade with their colony of New France. The Native American people were important partners in this growing fur trade, with the French forging alliances of kinship and trade with the Huron, Algonquin, and Innu peoples. It was these Native Americans that helped the French process the beaver furs and distribute them throughout the vast trade network that had been established long before European contact. However, during the first half of the 17th century, the number of traders and trade companies began to increase within North America, and a cutthroat competition began among them. The British-run Hudson Bay Company and the French-Scottish Northwest Company were two important companies in Canada. The companies were consistently in competition and had both high and low points throughout the years, which led to a great deal of tension between the two companies, often leading to minor armed skirmishes until the two were forced to merge by the British government. In the early years, the standard was that the Native American tribes would travel to the forts run by the companies in order to trade their goods. After Great Britain won the 7 Years' War in 1763, the American Revolution took place in 1776. Present-day Ontario became home to roughly 9,000 Loyalist settlers, some of whom were more attracted by the territory's cheap land than their loyalty to the British Crown. In 1791, present-day Ontario was officially named Upper Canada, while predominantly French-speaking Quebec was Lower Canada. The small settlement of York became Upper Canada's capital in 1796 and eventually changed its name to Toronto. One of the most renowned trappers and trader explorers from the Quebec region is a man named Toussaint Charbonneau. Charbonneau was a particular individual, the least liked of all of the members of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Lewis referred to him as a man of no particular merit. Historians have portrayed him as a coward who hid his wife and had a particular attraction to young Native American girls. He is referred to as Mr. Sacagawea. Toussaint Charbonneau was born around 1767 in Boucherville, Quebec, a city near Montreal. Charbonneau was a free trader who obtained goods on credit and traded them with the Indians. In 1796, he moved to present-day Bismarck, North Dakota on the upper Missouri River and settled among the Hidatsas and the Mandans. He adopted their way of life and lived in their cluster of earthen lodges. In 1804, when the Lewis and Clark expedition arrived at Fort Mandan, Charbonneau had two Shoshone wives. One was Sacagawea, or Bird Woman, who was about 16 years old, and the other was Otter Woman. He had purchased them from the Hidatsas. Charbonneau applied for a job as a Hidatsa interpreter, but Lewis and Clark were not very impressed with him. In the interview, he mentioned he had two Shoshone wives, aware of the importance of creating a good relationship with the Shoshone people. Lewis and Clark, nevertheless, hired Charbonneau.
Yes! Oh, come on.
Their intention was for him to take one of his Shoshone wives as a Shoshone Hidatsa interpreter. On March 11, 1805, Charbonneau was hired. This is the journal entry by Clark. We have every reason to believe that our interpreter, whom we intended to take with his wife as an interpreter through his wife to the Snake Indians, of which nation she is,
has been corrupted.
Some explanation has taken place which clearly proves to us the fact. We give him to the night to reflect and determine whether or not he intends to go with us under the regulations stated. The following day, March 12th, Charbonneau declined the job offer. Regulations of his employment with the Corps dictated that aside from interpreting, he had to perform duties that all other men in the expedition were expected to perform, such as standing regular guard.
I ain't standing guard.
5 days later, Charbonneau apologized for his behavior and accepted the conditions of his employment, becoming the oldest member of the expedition at 38 years old.
Even though you're old, you can call
The
me
expedition departed from Fort Mandan on April 7, 1805. Charbonneau took Sacagawea and his 55-day-old son, John Baptiste. Almost immediately after departure, Charbonneau proved to be a great cook, but a poor swimmer. In one occasion, just a few days after their departure, they were hit by a windstorm and the boat in which Charbonneau was traveling almost capsized.
Why don't you do it?
His lack of boating and swimming skills led to almost losing important documents, equipment, medicine, and trade items.
Lost everything.
If it had not been for Sacagawea, who reacted fast, all those items would have been lost forever. The expedition reached Shoshone lands on August 1805. Sacagawea recognized the chief as his brother, Kamadawat. Clark and Lewis negotiated very much needed horses with the Shoshones through Sacagawea and Charbonneau. The expedition reached the Pacific Ocean on November 1805. They spent the winter at Fort Clatsop and departed on their way back on March 1806. Charbonneau and Sacagawea arrived at the Mandan villages on August 1806. Charbonneau was paid $533.33 and a land warrant for 320 acres. During the journey, Clark had grown fond of Sacagawea's and Charbonneau's son, John Baptiste or Pomp. Clark even offered to raise him as his own child and pay for his education. They lived with the Mandans for the next 3 years until Charbonneau decided to move to Missouri, where he claimed his 320 acres of land. Used to the land of the frontier, Charbonneau did not get used to a life working the land. In the spring of 1811, he sold his property to Clark for $100, and John Baptiste was left under his care. Pomp was enrolled in a boarding school. Charbonneau found employment with the Missouri Fur Company and was stationed at Fort Manuel Lisa, South Dakota. Here is where Sacagawea died on December 20th, 1812, a few months after giving birth to her daughter, Lizette. She contracted putrid fever or typhus, a disease spread by fleas and treatable with antibiotics. Charbonneau was away on an expedition with his company when Sacagawea died. Clark was awarded the custody of Lizette and John Baptiste, who was already enrolled in a boarding school. From 1812 to 1838, Charbonneau took on many jobs. After working for the Missouri Fur Company, he took employment with competitor American Fur Company. Clark became superintendent of Indian Affairs and hired Charbonneau as an interpreter for government officials, explorers, and visiting dignitaries, such as Prince Maximilian of Wade, Germany. It is believed that Toussaint Charbonneau died in 1840 in Fort Mandan. Between 1785 and 1806, Upper Canada's population soared from 6,000 to 46,000. Many of Ontario's largest cities were founded during the early 19th century, prior to the War of 1812, when America's forces attempted, and failed, to conquer Upper Canada. Shortly after the 1837 Upper Canada Rebellion supporting responsible government, the territory joined with Lower Canada to become a single province in 1841. The province's population continued to soar, with the addition of nearly 100,000 Irish immigrants fleeing their country's potato famine. In 1851, the province's population was 952,000. Following years of parliamentary deadlock between Canada East and Canada West, the two Canadas agreed to federal union with the other British North American colonies. Two of those colonies, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, joined Quebec and Ontario as the first four provinces of the new nation of Canada in 1867. Ottawa's Parliament Hill became the country's new seat of government, and construction of Northern Ontario's first Canadian Pacific Railway stretch began in 1875. A special thanks to my friend from the north, Peter from the Woodland Escape channel, for recommending this video. Check out Peter's channel for some pure frontier entertainment you won't regret watching. Go ahead and check it out now. What are you waiting for? And as always, subscribe to this channel and smash the like button and share it with your friends. And as always, remember to get out there and explore. Thanks, guys.